Now we'll start. Thank you. Okay. Workshops right after lunch are difficult, especially when you're dealing with really crowded restaurants, so maybe a few more will still come in, hopefully. We're basically going to be following this outline that I did today, but before we get into the actual content of the workshop, introduce yourselves, tell me, and I'll get a little closer so it gets taped. Tell me if you're a triad member and what part of the triad you are. Here's some handouts. Oh dear.
Thank you.
See, I feel all inhibited here with being wired up. Okay. Who wants to start?
I'll start.
Okay.
My name is Judy Walsh, and I'm from Kansas City. I'm a birth mother twice. I had a daughter when I was 17 and one when I was 19, and relinquished both for adoption. My oldest one, she found me a year and a half ago. It's been a really wonderful reunion. And the second one I started searching for about a year ago and found her adoptive parents and tried to go through them. They were not receptive, but they did finally write me back and sent pictures of her. And I made contact with my daughter through another lady in our support group and wanted to know if she would at least talk to me. And she wrote me a very short letter, but nice, and said at this time in her life she's just not ready. Does not want the contact, and she said she thought a lot about it, and at one time she thought she did, but after reading my letter I sent to her parents, she says now she didn't, which makes me wonder, what did I put in that letter that made her change her mind?
Mm-hmm. How old was she at the time of contact?
She's 20,
Uh-huh.
and she's a sophomore in college. Her mother said there's been a lot going on in her life, but she hasn't said what that was.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if it's something personal. She said that she's indirectly involved in, so I don't know what that means.
Mm-hmm.
And her family's been very closed to me about anything about their family except for just specific details about my daughter. So I'm trying to deal with, the rejection or not knowing if she's ever going to want to. That's kind of where I am.
Okay, and you're not involved at all, how about search and support groups or anything like
I
that?
belong to a support group, yeah.
Uh-huh.
And I've, just been trying to do it on my own.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know what else I can do,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know how to really feel about it. I'm going to a psychologist for counseling, and he told me that I need to let go of her again.
Well, you might, after this workshop, want to take him the outline.
Yeah, because, I felt
Educate
like he was
your
telling me
therapist.
to give her up again.
Mhm.
And I just broke down, and I said, I can't do that.
Mhm.
You're asking me to do something I refuse to do again, because I didn't want to then, but I wasn't given any choices.
Yeah. Letting go is different from giving up and hope. Giving up hope.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm Glenda Shea. I'm a birth mother from Pittsburgh and a support group co-founder, Pittsburgh Adoption Connection. I completed my search 2.5 years ago. It's been pretty successful.
How old is your
She'll be 27.
27? Here's some handouts. All right, and are you involved in any kind of support groups or?
Support group leader.
Support group leader, good. Great. All right, we're introducing ourselves.
What's that?
Since we're such a small group, we have time to do that.
Okay. I'm Debbie Arnold, and I'm a social worker from Kansas City and do a lot of counseling with birth parents and birth families at all different kinds of phases of replacement, post-placement. And I'm trying to get a support group started. So.
Oh, great.
All right.
Oh, Tristan. Hi.
Great. Good that you're meeting here. Yes. All right.
I'm Janice Duncan-Smith, and I just found out about the fact that that birth mothers could search for their children within the past year. My husband, who died a couple of months ago, was the one who found out about on the Oprah Winfrey show.
Uh-huh.
started me going. I'm in the process of a search. Someone is helping me with it, and so far we've traced her possibly back to Switzerland.
Wow.
So she'll be 22. I'm trying to find out the real answer. Would they adopt American babies to people who weren't citizens, or I don't know the answer.
Did you go through an agency or private?
It's two women who are in business.
Okay. It's probably independent, though. It doesn't sound like an agency.
No, and no, it's not. And I don't know how to go about searching. But after just losing my husband a couple months ago, I'm realizing that all that grief for 22 years is coming up now.
Yeah. We're going to get into that in a minute, but a lot of that. Hi.
Hi, my name is Cher Kasperzak. I'm a birth mother. I have an 18-year-old daughter I'm trying to find. I've just started about 5 months ago. Started to look.
So you're right in the beginning parts
Pretty
of
much,
search.
Pretty much, yeah.
All right. And where are you from?
Miami.
Miami. Good. I should put these handouts in the back so that people can get them and I don't have to keep doing this. Can somebody... There are 3 different handouts.
I got 'em.
Can't have this one.
Oh,
All right. So you're just involved in searching, and have you connected with any kind of a group?
There really isn't that many groups down in Miami. All we have is Alma, and I'm not real impressed with them.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, well, maybe here you'll find out about something else that might be available. It seems like in Miami there should be something other than just Alma.
they're not even in Miami. I have to drive to
Yeah.
Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah. Okay, how about you?
I'm Gretchen Hoffman, and I'm a birth
Can people
mother.
try to speak up a little if you're close?
Yeah, and you need to speak up for the mic. That's why I'm moving around trying to get close here.
I'm Gretchen Hoffman, and I'm a birth mother. I have 2 children that I started for adoption also. I have an 18-year-old daughter that I've known her whereabouts for 10 years, and about 6 years ago I contacted the adopted parents, and I've been trying to develop a relationship with them until probably the past year, when I kept getting the message from the adopted father that he wasn't ready to tell my daughter about me, and I finally decided to contact her directly. And in September, I went to her. I ended up having an intermediary that was with me give her a letter directly, so I got to see her from a distance. And she connected by leaving a message on my answering machine that day. We spoke the next day for an hour. And since that time, she's rejected me. I have my son. I have just begun to search for, I've done all the information, relinquishing or waiving my right to confidentiality with the state of Minnesota is where I surrendered him, and I know they have a little more liberal laws, and I've provided all the information I can at this point, but I still don't have his name. He's 16. But I guess I'm wanting to focus on him more now that I've been rejected by my daughter.
Yeah.
I'm also involved with, I'm a cover-up for the Albany, New York area.
Good,
And there are a couple of other groups in the area that I connect with.
good. That helps a lot, being connected with a group. You want to introduce yourselves? I'll get a little closer for the benefit of the mic.
My name is Lisa Krober. I'm a birth mother. My son is 30 this year. I am just struggling with what might be the right thing to do. I have very mixed feelings about intruding in somebody's life and what my own needs are and what my own feelings are, all of which are unclear to me. So it's one of the reasons I came.
All right.
I'm Ann Coleman. I'm also a birth mother. My situation is a little unusual. It's very unusual. I don't know anyone else in the movement with my specific situation. I gave up a severely handicapped child. I was married. I had an amniocentesis that the doctors misdiagnosed, and my son was born with a rare genetic disease. And my husband and I decided we didn't feel we could cope. This was in 1987, and people tell you how different adoption law is now and how differently the agencies treat you. We weren't treated any differently. We were lied to and we were manipulated. And my son will be 4 in July, and we are looking for him. And we hope to be able to open up his adoption and have an ongoing relationship with him and his adoptive family. And I'm also very active in my Cub group. I'm the secretary of my local Cub chapter in the Washington, D.C. area.
Good, good. Yeah, that is a different situation that I haven't run into personally. Well, I was told when I got the letter just a couple of days ago that Triad members had signed up for this, and they had expected more clinicians would be here. And the letter said, give your workshop as if you're giving to clinicians, and I think it will be very beneficial. I think they want it for the benefit of people buying tapes. But we will go through the outline that I've given you, and really any of you that are involved in therapy of any kind, share this with your therapist if it has meaning to you. You know, I think that it's real important to educate our therapists as well as, you know, learning ourselves about ourselves. So what I will do is describe what I have seen over the last 18 years being a therapist myself, a more or less composite typical profile. And we'll see how many of you birth mothers here identify in some way with this. The very first thing I wrote here is that a birth parent in search, now we're dealing with birth parents in search, and all of you here are involved in some way in that. You wouldn't be in search if you weren't in some aspect of moving out of denial. You know, if you're completely locked into denial, you're going to be not even trying not to think of your child. So if you are involved in search, that means you are already moving out of the denial process. That is, I really think, I just went to a denial workshop before lunch, and I really think coming out of denial is a lifelong process too. You think you're all through, you've had years of therapy, and you know, you've maybe found your children, but there are pieces of the experience that you still might deny, and it's just really interesting as you go along how you find there's more yet to deal with. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the post-traumatic stress disorder. That's a diagnostic label that clinicians often will use with birth mothers particularly, for insurance purposes when they're in treatment. It's a diagnostic, a diagnosis that really applies to birth parents. So what I'm going to do is give you a little review of, or a view of, it's from the Diagnostic Statistics Manual 3 Revised, which is the one that's being currently used. The person has experienced an event that is outside the range of usual human experience, and that would be markedly distressing to almost anyone. Now you think about your experience. It is not the natural, normal thing to have a child and then give it up for adoption or lose it or have it taken from you. The natural course in life is when you get pregnant and you have a baby, you raise that baby generally. So giving up a child just in and of itself feels like a real unnatural act. It's outside the range of usual human experience and distressing. Are any of you here, can any of you say it was not a distressing thing to go through? You know, I'm a birth mother too. I don't know if you read about my background, but it was the most distressing event of my life. Winkler and Van Keppel did research in 1984 that really indicates that relinquishing a child for adoption is the single most traumatic event that a woman can experience in life. And that's taking into account all the traumatic things that a woman might experience, like incest or rape or tremendous abuse for years and years, ongoing. Bearing a child and relinquishing it for adoption or losing that child to adoption is the single most traumatic event, according to their research, that a woman can experience. So that kind of makes me feel better about it, because I used to think that I was just really not getting anywhere, that this, all these many years later, it still is very traumatic to me. And now that research helps me, it helps normalize my experience. I'm not abnormal because it's so traumatic. The research is really documenting that. Okay, back to the post-traumatic stress disorder. The traumatic event is persistently re-experienced in at least one of the following ways, and that names 4. I have found birth parents that all 4 of these apply to. 1 is recurrent and intrusive distressing recollections of the event. When you're really in denial and blocking it out, you may be able to go months or years even. I've had birth parents go 30 years and not think about it. And all of a sudden, here it comes back with a vengeance. And they have recurrent and intrusive distressing recollections of the event. Recurrent distressing dreams of the event. Sudden acting or feeling as if the traumatic event were recurring. Flashbacks. I've had flashbacks. It's really a startling experience to actually feel like you're reliving the event. One day I was holding my cat in a position like this that I wouldn't normally hold him. And this just happened about 3 years ago, and my daughter's 29. So 26 years after the fact, I'm looking at my kitty, and all of a sudden I did not see my little kitty. I saw my baby. And it was like I was reliving the experience of the last time I held her and said goodbye to her and talked to her. So this is something that's quite common. Have any of you experienced flashbacks?
I have a 6-pound dog that she's 10 years old, and I noticed that the more time that I spend with her, it's like, this reminds me a lot of the 6-pound daughter that I had 22 years ago.
The other thing is intense psychological distress at exposure to events that symbolize or resemble an aspect of the traumatic event, including anniversaries of the trauma. So how many of us go through all kinds of pain and distress at birthdays or Mother's Day or...
It's awful. And I guess Mother's Day is one of the really worst for me. And Valentine's Day. On Valentine's Day, I say to myself, and I remember when I had my son for a few months, and I had him on Valentine's Day, and there were these wonderful balloons that said, "I love you." And I wanted to get him one, and I felt like, how can I get him a balloon that says, "I love you, be my Valentine," when I'm thinking of giving this baby up? And I really go berserk on Valentine's Day.
See, that brings up a myth that's out there, that birth mothers who give their babies up don't love them. And that is a myth. I have yet to meet a birth mother, and I've counseled hundreds of birth mothers. I have yet to meet a birth mother that didn't love her child. She may not want to meet that child now because of trauma. I have someone in therapy right now with me who is terrified that she'll be found. She's not ready to meet this child, but she loves the child, and she's real good at separating her trauma and her feelings from the child. Now, a lot of times that really is difficult to do, to separate the baby from all the other traumatic events around it. So are you...
Birthdays. This year is probably the first time that I've tried to, I guess, empower myself around those times. And when I actually made contact with my daughter was on her birthday, or a couple of days before. And I purposefully did that so that I wouldn't feel that loss on her birthday. I would have felt like I had given myself the opportunity to get to know her on her birthday, so it didn't have the same sadness attached to it. Also, Mother's Day, I'm involved, with a group in Albany, and was able to hook somebody up on Mother's Day.
Oh,
and
wow.
To me, it was probably the best Mother's Day I've had, not for my sake, but for somebody else's.
Yes.
So I think there are ways that we can, make some changes so
Yes.
that we're not grieving all the time.
Yeah, that's good.
I have a question with regards to that. It would seem to me that a lot of those todays are not only emotionally charged for us, but maybe emotionally charged for the child, the adopted parents. And in that sense, is it perhaps a dangerous day to try to make contact? Would you be doing better not to pick what may be
Actually,
already emotionally charged time?
what I can tell you is I'm from Seattle, Washington, and I'm on the board of directors of WARM, Washington Adoption Rights Movement. It's a very controversial intermediary system. A lot of people don't agree with the intermediary system at all. But the confidential intermediaries with WARM do not make contact on anniversary dates, like the birthday of the child. They do not make contact during the holidays. They might find someone. In fact, I have a client in therapy right now with me she's a birth aunt. Her sister relinquished, and the two of them are searching. And they located the adoptee just before Christmas, but they would not make contact until after the holidays. So, yes, I'm glad you brought that up. That's a good point. It is not a good time to make the timing of a contact is really important. A little bit more about post-traumatic stress disorder, because you will probably find that a therapist will use this label. And I've had clients who are seeing psychiatrists or someone else and come to me and say, why did they give me this? You associate it with Vietnam War vets. You don't associate it with having a baby. Persistent avoidance of stimuli associated with the trauma or numbing of general responsiveness, as indicated by at least 3 of the following. Efforts to avoid thoughts or feelings associated with the trauma. Have we not all done this? We're just not going to think about this. Put it out of our minds. Do all kinds of things to avoid thinking or feeling about this child or children. Efforts to avoid activities or situations that arouse recollections of the trauma. 6 weeks after I relinquished my daughter, my cousin, who had had a baby at the same time, we went to a family reunion, and she was there with her baby. Well, everyone at the reunion thought my baby had died. And I didn't tell them that. I just said I lost the baby. And they assumed that, and I just let them assume what they would. And she would want me to hold her baby, and I could not even be in the same room with my cousin and her new baby because it was too traumatic. I was avoiding anything that would make me think of the trauma. An inability to recall an important aspect of the trauma. I think this is something that is really common. It's psychogenic amnesia. I'll give you my personal example, but I'm sure you can all plug in your own. I can vividly remember the 5 days in the hospital with my child, with my daughter. But I do not remember leaving the hospital, and I do not remember anything to do with the adoption agency, going and signing papers. I have no memory of that. I've had lots of therapy. I'm a therapist myself, and I've tried everything. I cannot access that. It is so painful. It's psychogenic amnesia. And it's like selective amnesia. We remember certain things, but we block out other things. In another workshop today, I heard them talking about how some birth mothers don't even remember the year of the birth or the birthday. You block out various things. I think that's enough. I don't want to get too bogged down with that. But anyway, it's real interesting. This gives you an idea of why a therapist or a doctor would use that diagnosis on you if you're in treatment.
I had one question about this because this came up in my therapy in the last few weeks. And I thought it fit me very well with two exceptions. I mean, on the one hand, my husband and I have gone to almost no family events since we gave up Jason. On the other hand, I'm largely fixated on what I've been through. Cub and adoption reform and searching for him have become the major focus of my life. And I can tell you almost every minute of everything that happened to him, though I have lost my memory about just about everything else in the world in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And is that still, I mean, and my therapist sort of said, well, but you're not avoiding things. And I said, yeah, but it seems to me I did this so well.
But I think it has to do with trauma in your life. You know, I grew up in a family where we were bilingual. I spoke 2 different languages. After I relinquished my daughter, now I didn't realize this for some time. It finally connected later, but I completely forgot the second language. You don't forget a second language that you've grown up speaking in your home. But I, to this day, cannot speak that second language, you know. And that was totally unrelated to my daughter. But it's interesting, when I found her, and in her yearbooks, all through her yearbooks, she was in that particular language honor society. They had Spanish, Italian, German, French, whatever, and she chose that one to identify with that culture. So, you know, I was speaking it when I carried her. Very interesting. Back to the typical profile in your outlines. There's a profound grief and mourning process as the awareness of the loss sets in. All of us, I'm sure, can identify with that. Even after you meet a child, an adult, whatever, your child though. You know, I'm not meaning to perpetuate an adoptee being a child, but it is your child even if it's 40 years old. But that seems to really increase the grief process, because now you know more of what you lost. Adoptees experience the same thing, a really heightened mourning process during search, and especially after you have factual information and you're dealing with the real truth and often the real person. Heightened anxiety states coupled with increased fantasies. Can anybody relate to that? Increased isolation and or alienation due to effects of shame and guilt on the self-esteem. If I'm feeling really terrible about myself, I'm going to isolate myself. Or if I'm just depressed and anxious all the time and obsessed with, like you said earlier, all you can think about is your child, then people just tend to go away. We alienate ourselves. They get sick of it. They don't want to hear it anymore. You see lots of heads nodding. Disturbed relationships. I don't know if any of you can connect with that. Yes, heads nod. In all aspects of relationships, at work, at home, with your other children, if you have other children, with your spouse, partner, friends, it's like you're so obsessed and so preoccupied with your own pain and your own newly emerging awareness of just how profound that loss is, that you can't function like you used to be. It's like, where's my old friend? You know, that was my friend for 20 years. What happened to you? Or we want our mom back, you know. Or husband wants his wife back. It's like, it really does impact on every relationship that you have. Depression, suicide thoughts, ideation, appetite and sleep disturbances. Lots of physical ailments, psychosomatic complaints. And this, I put this in here because this is really interesting. So often when a birth parent is in search, either during the search or at contact time, they will either gain a lot of weight or lose a lot of weight very rapidly. It seems like it's one or the other. Again, heads nodding. I gained probably 45 pounds when I was searching for my daughter, and then I felt like I couldn't make contact once I found, because, you know, I wasn't perfect. But a birth mother who recently found back in Seattle that happens to work at our agency lost about 40 pounds in a very brief period of time, maybe 2 months. It just fell off of her, and it was all related to the search process. Spontaneous regressions to the age at relinquishment. You were 17 when you relinquished the first one. Often I will have a birth mother in a workshop, and not in a workshop, well, that too, but in therapy with me, who might be 40 years old and a very competent person, you know, in her world. Excuse me. Competent as a mother, competent as a family person, as a friend, professional person in her field, her chosen field. But when she goes through the search process, it's like all of a sudden she's 17 all over again and feeling completely powerless, helpless, and it's like regressing back to being that very traumatized, helpless, powerless person. And they feel like they're 17 again. Did you find that experience?
Yeah. Very much so, especially with the second one, since I'm searching for her.
Yeah.
And I'm 40, and I was, this describes me to a T.
Describes you to a T. Now, and I want to say this too, that's why I've put this in here, because this is for birth parents in search. It's different if you have not been searching and you're found. Now, some of these things would apply there too, but the search process seems to trigger a lot of these things happening. Extreme ambivalence to the point of immobilization. I want to make contact, but I don't. Or I want to search, but I'm scared to death. It's like extremes, one or the other. And then you go back and forth, so you do nothing. You know, you start and you stop. Everybody's nodding to that one, yeah. High expectations about what search will accomplish. Every birth parent that's ever come into therapy with me who's in search, and I myself, when I was going through search, had extremely high expectations of what search was going to bring to me. Later on, I'm going to get into what search can and cannot do, so we'll get back to that one in a little while. Okay, in the therapy process, I've listed several treatment goals or specific areas of focus that, as a therapist, and for you who might be in therapy, these are important things. If your therapist doesn't touch on these, you bring them up. You know, there aren't graduate courses on adoption yet. You know, hopefully there are going to be one of these days. When you go for social work, MSWs, or various clinical psychologists, whatever kind of therapist you are, marriage, family, child counselor is what I am. I didn't get courses on adoption to teach me how to work with triad members. I've done a lot of that kind of training of therapists, but I didn't get any myself. I learned it all from triad members and from my own experience. And, you know, like Kate said at the opening address, we are the experts, and we have to teach our therapists how to help us, you know. Okay, the very first area, specific area that needs to be focused on is working through the past in order to move forward. It's like we get stuck back there at 17 in the trauma that we experienced. But the first thing, even before looking at the actual pregnancy, it's important to look at your life circumstances prior to conception, including family of origin work or the families that you came out of, what your life experience was. Oh, we're losing power. Now this is going to be interesting. We're in the dark. I hope I can remember what I've written on my outline.
We can't see the outline, so
We are in complete darkness here for the benefit of the tape. But it's really important to look at that, because what's really interesting is that an alarming number of birth parents have come from dysfunctional families, alcoholic families, families with various kinds of dysfunction, abuse, Another thing that we've noted in the research is that birth parents seem to run in families. I was a minister's daughter. There were 4 children. 3 of us are birth parents. And I see that a lot where there are more than one birth parent in a family. I wish I could see my notes. Anybody have a flashlight?
Family secret.
Oh, good. Thank you. Magic. Besides looking at your life circumstances really in depth with the therapist prior to the pregnancy itself, then it's really important to reconstruct the pregnancy and the relinquishment experience. What was happening in your life at that time? And really go over it in detail with the therapist. Exploring past and current issues around the child's other birth parent. You know, every child who's born, we all have birth mothers here today, and a social worker. You're not a birth mother.
Social worker too.
2 social workers, okay. Oh, we're losing power again. This is very unusual. It's distracting. Anyway, this is a really important piece and it's something that's really important to do before you meet your child, before you have contact. Because depending on how unresolved you are in your conflicts with the birth father in this case, that can really contaminate whatever goes on in the contact and the reunion experience.
I have a question that I was told to ask when I came to this conference, the first one that I've been to. The birth father died 2 years ago at a very young age of an aneurysm. I know that he was married and he has two children. I don't have any children. Should part of my search include going to his wife and telling her that I'm in a search? What would you advise?
Okay, you're the social worker.
Right, but I'm a birth mother.
Okay. But so your child's birth father died?
Died,
Yes.
But he has two children, so if I found...
What are the age of the children?
I don't know.
You have no idea?
Probably adolescence early, I would imagine.
My first response probably would be that I would focus on finding your child and let your child know there are siblings and see if your child wants to look for the siblings, since you don't have any direct contact with the...
Is there an obligation to the wife, to his wife, to let her know, though?
You don't know if she knows. She may know about it.
She knows.
That's a hard one.
Yeah.
That's a hard one.
No one has been able to give me an answer.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what to do.
Yeah.
Why would you feel there was an obligation to the wife to let her know?
Just because these are her children who are the half siblings of my daughter, and if she wanted to find them, then I think she should be aware of this.
Mm-hmm.
Prepared.
Yeah.
My gut reaction would be like yours, that if your daughter is interested in contact with them, then
Yeah.
that would be the point.
But then she would be the one to also contact the wife.
I think
Yeah, I think so.
want to run interference, because that could be a very awkward situation.
See, there's this, again, this is getting indirectly at another myth that we all buy into, and that's that there's something unhealthy or about birth family and adoptees coming back together, and like everybody has to protect everyone.
See, I wouldn't have any problem going to this man's, wife.
Sure.
But other people, like I've had mixed reactions. Like, oh, I don't think you better do that, or
Yeah.
oh, well, I think that you should. So,
Yeah. She's a grown-up person. The children are probably adolescents now. Right now, your child is not a reality in your life or theirs as far as a physical reality.
Right.
If you find your child, is it a boy or girl?
Girl.
A girl, and she wants to have contact with siblings, I would think that would be a time to really address that.
okay.
Sounds like you have curiosity yourself about the birth father's relationship. Post you.
Oh, you mean about him and his family? No. No, I did want to see him and make contact and ask if he was curious and to let him know that I was searching, and then
Yeah, that's
found out
different.
that he died, and so like that was another loss. Like, gee, I didn't even
Right.
get to make the contact to let him know that
Right.
that I was searching. I mean, I don't harbor any animosity towards him or in the past.
Natural curiosity to know how he went out in his life.
Yeah.
What I can tell you is that adoptees a lot of them feel very strongly about having some control over the search process and when to find people or when to connect with people, and I would think that your daughter might really want to have some say and some input into, to search or not to search, and to contact or not to contact her siblings.
You're right. I never thought about that until now, but I'm curious about what his children look
Sure.
like.
That's another
I just
connection.
now
Sure.
thought that, but that really.
Because looking at his other children might give you more of an idea of what your own daughter looks like.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Revelation.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea if his parents are alive?
His parents. Oh, his mother might be. His father is dead.
And did his mother know about the baby at the time?
I have no idea.
Yeah, that's a good one. Anyway, really getting into looking at your feelings back at the time, how you felt at the time, if he left you, if he walked out on you, if he was very supportive, whatever was going on with birth father, it was a casual thing or someone you were totally in love with, whatever the circumstances were with this father of your child, it's real important to look at your, really examine your feelings about that.
To do with that, though, when my first daughter found me, she wanted to meet her father, too. And so I called his mother, who was living at the time, and she said, oh, yes, I'm sure, John would like, to meet her, and he's talked about it to me, over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And this mother totally didn't want him to even have anything to do with me at the time, so she shocked me, and she apologized to me, which was a great healing for me.
Yes.
But then, after I contacted him, he was just very angry about it. Couldn't believe his mother had given me his address and phone number. And so then he talked to his mother, and then she wouldn't talk to me anymore. And now she died a couple of months ago. And I felt very rejected again.
Mm-hmm.
Very
Sure.
hurt, because we had been high school sweethearts. And he was just very rude. How do you deal with that then?
Well, see, that's hooking you right back into an old loss. You felt rejected all over again. You have to deal with the rejection back then and now.
And that's something I know my doctor I go to is never addressed. They just kind of sit there and look at you when you tell them about it.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, well, too bad.
Well, hopefully you can look at it a little more than just, oh, well, too bad.
Yeah.
It's important.
Or they say, well, you don't need him anyway.
Yeah.
You'll have her all to yourself now. But she hurts. And when
Sure.
she hurts, I hurt.
Sure, of course.
And I want her to have that relationship, but he doesn't want it, so I can't force it.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Okay, the fourth thing under this working through the past is to review your expectations and fantasies about your child, both at the time of birth and relinquishment and how time has changed that up to the present. Like at the time that I relinquished my daughter and was holding her like this, I said to her, please find me when you're 18. I had this fantasy in my head that when she's 18 and she's no longer a child, she's an adult, she can find me. I believed that was true, that she could just like that, Someone in here, yeah, it was you, I guess. No, I don't remember who said it. Just learned recently that birth parents can search. Yeah. Now we're getting audio from another workshop. This is really, they're having a problem in the hotel today. It's really important to look at what your expectations were then, and a lot of times we don't know that we had expectations until they're not met in the present. That's how we find out we had expectations, when all of a sudden something didn't happen that we expected to happen. Thank you. This is really distracting. Okay, another treatment goal, another area to focus on is the conflicts over changing views and practices in adoption. A big one is the reason for relinquishment, then and now. You know, most of us here, except for one person who relinquished 4 years, or not 4 years ago, but recently. Yeah, right. But the whole thing was we bought into this idea that a child needs two parents. Your child needs a mother and a father. And that was one of the big pressures on us if you were an unwed mother, you know, that the child needs a mommy and a daddy. And so if you love your child, you'll relinquish the child to go to a mommy and a daddy. Well, now single parents adopt. Gays and lesbians adopt now. You know, this was unheard of about 29 years ago when I relinquished my child. So that produces a lot of conflict today for birth parents who are seeing how differently adoption is done now. And you know, again, it just reinforces this feeling of it not being fair. Why wasn't it like that then? I wouldn't have had to lose my child. I could have parented my child alone, except that times were different then, and there are a lot of resources today that weren't available then. We'll get into that a little more later.
Except they still aren't so available now either.
Can you speak up?
It's the resources, the attitudes have changed a lot, and the resources are better now than they were, but they're still not so wonderful, and we all make mistakes about how wonderful it is now. My CUP chapter has dealt with 2 women this year contemplating giving up a baby, and one of the problems is if you're middle class, if you're making it by yourself on one income, there may not be any support programs for you, and there becomes problems with child care. Your one income may be able to support you, but it didn't take into account pregnancy expenses and maternity leave and all of that. And certainly the women who were, the one woman gave up her baby recently and said before she gave it, this is a woman who we only found out, who, for all I know, has gone into labor in the last 48 hours. That's one of the things she's grappling with. So that it's very different than it used to be, but there's still stigma.
Right.
Still support systems still aren't so great, and we all ought to be working to make that stuff better
Right.
for other women now.
I totally agree with that. That leads right into the next one here. The stigma of illegitimate birth was really, really huge 17 years ago, 19 years ago, 29 years ago. Now, parents aren't required to marry. In fact, you know, it's even become quite in vogue to have children and not be married. You know, maybe it started with movie stars doing it, and then it generated into just the general public. But Farrah Fawcett and Ryan O'Neal, you know, had a child, and they were proud of their child, but didn't have to get married just because they had a child. So that brings up a lot of conflict too. These are all big reasons why a lot of us relinquished. Another is the whole thing about no financial or physical or emotional resources and support. They were very, very limited 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. And like you say, they have greatly improved, but it's certainly not perfect yet. And I happen to be in an area where we have a lot of resources in Seattle. But I know there are many areas all over the country where there are still limited resources. Okay, another real huge conflict has to do with attitudes about unplanned out-of-wedlock pregnancy. I have one client who talks about how she was whisked away to pregnancy prison, the home for unwed mothers. And that's really how she felt. She was in a pregnancy prison. All these young girls, all unmarried, all pregnant, and they couldn't even use their own names. They had to use fake names, and never were supposed to exchange addresses or identities, so that they, you know, they serve their time, and then they get out of pregnancy prison and go back to their real life. Well, that doesn't happen today like that. And I'm sure there are individual circumstances where it does still happen and the stigma is there and they get whisked away. But now you don't have to drop out of school when you're pregnant. You can stay on in school until you deliver. I just recently had a client, 16 years old, who delivered her child and subsequently relinquished. But she stayed in school up until she was worried about her water breaking during class, you know, and there was no problem with the school officials or her peers. She was completely accepted being 16 and pregnant and unmarried. Churches, you used to have to go away and not let anyone in the church know that you were pregnant. My father would not allow me to come home even when I was 3 months pregnant when I married. And so that meant that when I was always 3 months more pregnant than I should have been. Well, I married a teenage alcoholic who was very violent and physically abusive. And at one point he tried to kill me and the unborn baby, and I called to ask to come home. I was freaked out, and my father said, "You can't come home. I'd have to resign the ministry and leave the church." Well, that doesn't happen today. In the church that I attend back in Seattle now, the music minister's daughter just recently had a baby and kept her baby. She's 16. And he didn't have to stop being the minister of music at the church because his daughter had a baby. You know, things are real different about the attitudes about unplanned or out-of-wedlock pregnancies now. Closed versus open adoption practices. You know, we're hearing more and more and more and seeing more and more openness in the way adoptions are being handled today. Cooperative adoptions and ongoing contact. It's kind of like then, never shall the twain meet again. And now, in the completely open and cooperative adoptions, it's like never shall they be parted. That was just a totally foreign concept to me when I relinquished. So that, again, produces a lot of conflict for the birth parent in search now. All the attitudes about searching, contact, and reunion. Back then, it was strictly taboo, and only the extremely neurotic or emotionally disturbed search. You remember that attitude? And even if you were in therapy, they would just gloss right over it, and you know, if you really pressed it, then you were extremely neurotic or emotionally disturbed. I'll get into more about that in a little while. Of course we're disturbed. It's normal to be disturbed because we've done a very unnatural, abnormal thing in giving away a child that came out of our bodies. Anyway, now searching and contact and reunions is widely accepted, widely practiced, widely published. You can pick up a paper or a newspaper or a magazine, turn on TV, and see it all over the place. So it's even encouraged by a lot of adoption agencies. I work for Children's Home Society in Seattle, and we routinely encourage adoptees who call in for non-identifying information, make that tentative call, and you know, they just want their medical. And immediately we start talking about, are you in search and are you thinking about search? And we encourage them in that. And a lot of times they're shocked that an agency would take that kind of a position.
Do you give the same encouragement to birth mothers involved?
Absolutely. Yes.
Because most agencies don't.
Yeah.
Most agencies.
And adoptive parents, all the triad members. You know, it's a reality today. The whole business of secrecy and anonymity is on its way out. Okay, another real important aspect clinically in working with the birth family and the birth parents, particularly in search, is looking at the child and all your fantasies and your hopes and your dreams about that child. This is a really important one. How many of you birth parents here today have age progressed your baby? Is it a baby or is it whatever the current age is? You know, my daughter's 29, but it's real easy for me to still think of her as that little 5-day-old baby. It's hard for me to imagine a 29-year-old woman. But it's real important to age progress your child. One of the ways you can do that is to get in more contact with people that are the age of your child today, young people, 19 years old, maybe take a not continuing education, take a class, and what am I trying to say, like a junior college or community college class, or, do something through your church where you can maybe volunteer to work with that age group and learn more about what kids are like or young adults are like at the age of your children. It really helps to make that baby grow up in your mind and be real. So it really helps you prepare yourself for when you do actually have contact. What kind of life do they imagine the child has had? This gets into the fantasies. What does the birth parent fear and hope the child thinks of them? What does the birth parent hope to be? How does the birth parent hope to be received by the child? What kind of a relationship do they want? Anybody want to comment on that part of it? Have you had any fantasies about what you're going to find? Is it hard to do that, or do they just intrude on your thoughts a lot?
I had fantasies, but they were squelched. As
Yeah.
a result of the rejection.
Yeah.
But
Did the fantasies stop with being rejected?
no, I guess I haven't.
No, I can't say that
I mean,
either.
she's only 18, and I know that I have to just give that time.
Yeah.
I have to give her maturity. She's still a little girl.
Yeah.
To her adoptive parents, she's still a little girl. And they haven't let her grow up yet. So I have to do the same.
What we've seen through the search and support groups throughout the country is that reunions generally tend to go better later, like late 20s, 30s, than for people who are found. I'm not talking about the ones who search, but for adoptees who are found, if they're found, like I contacted my daughter at 19. At 19, the last thing most 19-year-olds want is another parent on the scene. This is a time developmentally when you're pulling away from parents and you're trying to establish your own independence and autonomy, and it can be really overwhelming to think of another parent coming on the scene.
But if you don't present yourself as a parent, which you are but you aren't, you're really just an interested party.
Right, but they don't know how you're going to be. They don't. And a lot of this has to do with the kind of relationship they've had with their adoptive parents. I have a good friend in Seattle. She's a teacher. And she had a horrendous life with her adoptive mother who was very possessive and very demanding and very controlling and really, this friend never married, and she took care of her mother until she died in her 90s recently, last year. And she wanted to do a search, but as she thought more about it, she said, what if I find a birth mother just like my adoptive mother? And it's not like she's looking for another parent because she's 50 years old now. She's not looking for a mommy. But just the thought of having another mother come on the scene and try to control her life in some way, but particularly 18, 19, 20 years old, young adults, it's not that we present ourselves as wanting to be their parent, but just the idea of, we are the birth parent, the birth mother. And another parent coming on the scene sometimes is not something they're ready to deal with. Another aspect of that is that they are very much involved in making life choices as far as education and career and spouses, or do I want to be married or do I not? And there are just so many things that they're trying to do in struggling with their own young adult identity that it's just, there's not time there to fit in a birth parent.
But, you use that same argument that at an early age, if they grew up with the awareness of who they were, it might be more readily accessible, for them to incorporate you into their lives at an early age.
Right.
Because of the time awareness has allow them to mature maybe at a better rate.
Right.
And so, I don't know, I think contacting them at the earliest age possible is the best.
Yeah, and that's another thing. I was
They may
15.
not be able to handle it at that time, but at least they have that information to start with.
Yeah. 15 years I was in Southern California, and I was involved with search groups where they would actually do minor searches, which is another real controversial issue. But they seemed to feel that it was better to contact really early or later than in those late teenage, early 20 years, like contacting at 12 or 14 or 11, or one birth mother I remember found her 10-year-old and found an adoptive mother who was thrilled to have the birth mother and birth father on the scene. These were birth parents married to each other. So,
And I wonder, I mean, I knew my daughter's whereabouts when she was 10, but I didn't, because I was told, you know, wait. All right, so I waited
Yeah.
years, you know,
Yeah.
before I made contact.
yeah,
So it didn't make a difference, but maybe it would have if I contacted her at 10.
yeah. Okay, what are realistic expectations in bridging the gap of all those long separated years? I want to read something that Dr. Robert Anderson, who's here at the conference, by the way, he's doing some workshops. In fact, he's doing one right now. Something that he said in one of his articles. I dropped one of my articles, I think. I dropped the one that, you've got it? No? Does someone have did I pass that out? It's an article on adoptees searching.
Is this it?
Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to read what he says. This is actually from The Nature of Adoptee Search, Adventure, Cure, or Growth. He basically talks about 3 things motivate adoptees to search. Some of them do it as an adventure, some do it as a cure for all their ills, and some actually do it as a growing experience. But let me just read what he says here. He says, there is the issue of timing. Adoptees who search generally learn of their adoption in early childhood and make reunion in their late 20s. This is more than 25 years of living, during which time fantasies and beliefs relating to the adoption have been incorporated into their personalities. The adoption issues do not remain sealed along with the legal papers in a safe deposit box at the bank. They are a part of the experience that shapes adoptees into the persons that they become. It seems somewhat naive to think that a family reunion, dramatic though it may be, can readily alter the experience of a quarter of a century. And that's something that I see over and over and over in reunions. People want to bridge that gap of 25 or 30 or 35 years, and they want to go on from this point as if that never happened. But in reality, you're taking your child of 25 or 30 years, they have a whole history and a whole life that may have been very, very different from what it would have been if they'd grown up with you. And you've had all those years of living, and bringing the two together as if it never happened is impossible. You can't do that. You go on from this point, and we're really not in this workshop talking about post-search that much today, but I think that's important in preparing ourselves to realize that searching is not going to cancel out the void of all those years of not knowing each other, and it's also what we're going to have to deal with in contact is the separate lives that we've had. These are really good articles. I would highly recommend. The other article is Why Adoptees Search, Motives and More. Every birth parent in search I know is really curious about how adoptees feel about search. So I would recommend both these articles. They're by Dr. Robert Anderson. He may have some of them with him. I shouldn't say he would, but if any of you are interested in these articles, give me your name and address and I'll mail them to you when I get back to Seattle. Articles by Robert Anderson. He's a psychiatrist and adoptee. Okay, another big issue is telling your family and your friends and others about the search, or another way of saying that is coming out of the closet. Starting with your immediate family, if you have a partner, your partner, your spouse, and your other children. A lot of birth mothers experience tremendous resurgence of that shame, feeling of shame that was associated with the original relinquishment experience. And they project that onto their children, that if they tell their other children there's another child out here and this awful thing that I did, that my other children will reject me. And so the whole business of coming out of the closet with your family, with your immediate family and with the extended family members, your parents, it just brings up all the issues that might have just got swept under the carpet initially. Like I never talked to either one of my parents. After the day that my daughter left the hospital, I never, ever talked to them again. They're both dead now, many years. But I wish that I would have been able to talk to them. And that's one of the things in therapy with birth parents now. I really try to help facilitate that so that they can establish communication with their families and work through all those old issues. They really do interfere in the reunion process if you have a lot of unresolved conflicts. I have a birth mother and her daughter who is 26 who come to a post-reunion group that I do. And the birth mother's mother, so the maternal grandmother, was a major factor in the relinquishment. She actually had the birth father arrested. The birth mother and birth father had run across the state line to get married, and she was pregnant. And so the mother had the birth father arrested and had her daughter put in some kind of juvenile shelter or home or something, and had her incarcerated. She wasn't in jail because she was under 18. But, and one of the major problems was because it was an interracial relationship. And now we come forward 26 years, and all these old unresolved conflicts with this grandmother are really playing a big part in this relationship with the 26-year-old adoptee who was found by her birth mother. And the birth mother also found the birth father, who never had any other children, never got married. So it's real important to try to work through these conflicts with your parents, with aunts and uncles, whatever, family members. Friends, co-workers, and strangers. It's real easy to start talking on the airplane flying to an adoption conference to strangers about your experience as a birth parent in search. Have you any of you had that? Yeah, it's like you just open wide up, and just spill it all out to strangers. And that's real different from the time of relinquishment. We didn't do that, did we? But now we can talk about it. Now we're encouraged to talk about it. I wrote here, guaranteed all will not be peaceful and harmonious. When you're talking about your family, your extended family, and all your friends, all the people in your lives, you will get varying opinions and find people that you thought were a best friend of 25 years who all of a sudden has all kinds of judgment about how could you do that? How could you go and disrupt her life? What if she doesn't even know she's adopted? And get real strong opinions. Generally, in sharing this with people, if you get a real strong reaction back, look a little deeper and you'll probably see they have some connection to adoption. They know someone, or in their own, somewhere along the way, there's an adoption secret there, or some way they've been touched by adoption. And what you're doing is making them look at their own issues. Okay, the all-consuming obsession of search. None of us know about that, do we? Life will never be the same again. I do workshops back in Seattle called Deciding to Search workshops. And it's dealing with the ambivalence of search and how search is going to impact on your life. And this is something I really stress because it makes me think of Dr. Anderson's article, Search is an Adventure. People who are entering into search on a lark and just going to have a neat adventure, you better stop and think about this because it changes your life forever. You can't ever go back to how it was before you decided to search. You can't ever go back to your fantasies of how wonderful it's going to be when you find your child when you've actually done the search and been rejected. Then you have to deal with the reality. So, you know, in entering into search, you really have to look at all the possible ways this could turn out and kind of run scenarios through your mind and see how you react emotionally. What if it's this? What if it's that? You can kind of make yourself crazy with what ifs, but it's involuntary when you're in search. One of the neat things about searching is that as facts filter in, some of your fantasies, you have to, this can be neat, it cannot be neat. You know, you have to let go of your fantasies as the facts filter in. If you've had horrible fantasies that your child's dead and you find out your child's alive, that's a wonderful fact to filter in. And you can easily let go of this fear that something horrendous has happened to your child. But if you have really incredible fantasies about happily ever after and being close and having a wonderful reunion and then find rejection, that's very difficult. I've heard lots of birth parents and adoptees at some point in their search process say they wish they could go back into the not knowing because what they found out was difficult to deal with. What I can say about that, through all the years I've been doing this, over a period of time and as you work through everything, I have found that everyone ultimately says, the ones I've worked with have said, that they would do it all over again, even though the results and the outcome were not what they had hoped for. I feel that way personally. I certainly, going into it, if I had known my daughter would reject me and 10 years later still not know me, I might have really, really thought about that and, you know, maybe not have been so quick to make contact. I don't know. But looking back on it, I don't regret having done the search. And I have so many facts that they really give me comfort and peace to know just simple things like she's alive. You know, until you actually complete your search and have some documentation, you don't know if your child is dead or alive. So I would rather know my child is alive and rejected me than not know if she was alive, you know. Again, as that all-consuming obsession of search takes over, we get into relationship conflicts again because you're not there doing all the things you normally were doing that people in your lives were accustomed to. It's like all you can think about is search. All you can talk about is search. You're obsessed. And it takes its toll physically, emotionally, spiritually, and sometimes financially, depending on how you're going about this. These are all things that you need to be aware of as you enter into that search process, that it is going to have its toll on you. There will be tremendous rewards as you go along in the search process. For every prize, there's a price. And that's really true. You know, we can wall ourselves in and say, well, I don't want to know anything and I'm just going to stay in limbo because I wouldn't want to deal with rejection. But for the price of limbo, staying in limbo and not having to deal with rejection, I have to deal with all these unanswered questions. You know, for the prize, I'll just leave it there. For every prize, there's a price, and what you have to constantly weigh is the prize worth the price? It's really, really beneficial to be in therapy and in support while you're in search. I'm glad a lot of you are hooked up to good support groups. Cub was my lifesaver when I went through search. Absolutely was my lifesaver. The last thing I wrote here was that you should take a crash course on the lifelong impact of adoption through reading books. There are a lot of really good books out on adoption now. Through workshops, attending conferences like this, reading the research. One of the very best books that I highly recommend is Birth Bond. How many of you have read that book? It's really good. Birth Bond. Pardon me? Right. Linda Brown and Judith Gediman, Gediman. I think it's the best ever written on search and reunion. It's about post-reunion relationships and experiences. Birth Bond. Somewhere in your, I think it's in the red book, the syllabus, I give some recommended readings, some suggested readings, and that's one of them. Okay, what search can and cannot do for the birth parents? It can provide factual information to replace the limbo of not knowing, but it cannot give you your baby back. And the bottom line always is we want our babies back. Every birth parent, and this includes birth fathers. I have several birth fathers. I have 5 different birth fathers who come to various groups that I do back in Seattle. And they all would like to have had their babies back. You know, they grieved and mourned just, I don't want to say just like birth mothers, but their pain is as real as the birth mother's pain. And some of them who bailed out 15 or 20 years ago and left the birth mother when they found out they were pregnant are mourning and grieving that too, that they didn't stay by their girlfriend's side and keep the baby. And you know, this is something I have a new appreciation for just in the last 4 or 5 years in working with birth fathers, to realize that birth fathers suffer too over this. And again, it comes back to what I was talking about earlier. We really need to examine our feelings about the other birth parent. And in this case, all of us are women, so the birth fathers that are represented from our children. It's real easy to think that they are bastards and that they never would change. But believe me, they change too. That doesn't mean that that's not a guarantee that they will have changed for the better. But I know birth fathers who have done tremendous growing, and you know, would be really neat to have them reunited with their adult children now. Okay, searching can provide possible contact, reunion, and relationships. Possible. But it cannot eliminate forever any present or future pain. A lot of times going into search, you hurt so much, and there's just this overwhelming pain that you're dealing with, and mourning and grieving, and you think that once you find your child and you know your child's alive and you have a relationship with your child, that all the pain is going to disappear. And that is not the reality. I really do believe there are certain aspects of our birth parent experience that we never get over. We learn how to cope with it and live with it, and we can go on and have incredibly productive and happy lives. But there will always be moments that you connect with your pain again. Because that was, remember, I started out talking about the research is really supporting the fact that that's the single most traumatic event that a woman can experience. And that pain is something that, it's kind of like people learn how to live with chronic physical pain. I think birth parents have to learn how to live with chronic emotional pain. And there are lots of times that you can go on and you're not that consciously aware of the pain, but every now and then something will trigger it and you'll be aware, wow, it's still there. Yeah, see, heads nodding again. Okay, searching can provide productive, ongoing process of resolution and closure, but it cannot cancel out the lifelong impact of adoption. Okay, some of the exceptional but not uncommon experiences in working with birth parents is that sometimes they are dealing with secondary infertility. How many of you here had other children? And some of you never had any other children? Yeah. It's been my experience. See, there, even in this small group, more of you didn't have other children than those of you who did.
Because it's
For whatever reasons, it's quite a statistically significant, and I don't have the exact statistics, but it's a statistically significant phenomenon that a lot of birth parents do not have other children. Some develop secondary infertility, some just make a conscious choice, some realize during the search process or at reunion after they've met their child, all of a sudden it comes rushing in. That's what that was all about. That's why I always chose not to have any other children. And except that now they're 48 years old and they're feeling it's really too late now. I don't think I should get pregnant now. You know, I have a birth father in that place right now. He feels now that his birth parent experience really played a major factor in his choosing a woman he knew was infertile when he first started getting involved with her and ended up marrying her. So he feels that he is an infertile man, although he is not biologically infertile, but because he chooses to be married to the woman he's married to, they are an infertile couple. And he's dealing with that loss, that the only child he will ever have in this life, by his choice, is the one that he relinquished, and he's involved in a search right now for her. Okay, the found birth parent who never would have searched. You were found by your oldest child. Would you have searched for her?
No, because I was like her, I didn't know I could.
Yeah.
I really didn't think I could, and I didn't know who to go to or how to do it. I wanted to desperately, and I wrote a letter to the state 10 or 12 years ago asking if they could let me know how she was, if she was okay, if she was alive. They sent a letter back that gave a description of her from the time she was born until she was 6 months old. And it took me 4 months to get that letter.
Wow.
And that's all I got.
Wow.
And they didn't tell me if she was alive today or not.
Yeah.
And I cherished that letter. But
Oh, yes.
So you were thrilled when she contacted you?
Oh, yes.
Now, see, that isn't every birth parent's experience who's found. I've had quite a number of birth parents who were found who just went into a tailspin of trauma.
Oh, I was scared to death that she was going to hate me or something.
Mhm.
But the lady who contacted me through this group she went through assured me she was very happy about it. She really wanted to find me. So I was
For a birth parent, for a birth mother who has been totally in the closet, maybe never told anyone else all these years about this experience. Maybe she's married, maybe she has other children, and she's established in her life, but never told anyone. It can be an extremely traumatic event to be found by the child that you relinquished. It forces you out of the closet. You have to do something about this. You have to make some decisions. First of all, you're confronted with all the pain and the recurring memories of that initial experience. But it also forces you to make decisions about, am I going to say yes to the contact? Am I going to reject my child all over again? Or am I going to let this child into my life and have a meeting and see what they want, you know? Yes?
Do you find that those found birth mothers eventually do respond to their children and let them in their lives to some degree?
Most of the found birth parents,
Yeah.
birth mothers? Yes, I would say so. Not always, but it's a more uncommon occurrence for birth parents to say no. And I take that primarily from the statistics we've gathered through WARM in Washington State. They've done thousands of reunions, and of all now this isn't just birth mothers, but of all the people who are searched for, 99% are found, and 94% consent to contact. So that's really high statistics. 94% consent to contact in Washington State through the intermediary system. WARM stands for Washington Adoption Rights Movement.
What was the percentage?
99% of the searches are successful. The people are found. That means adoptees and birth parents. And 94% consent to contact. So, 6% don't. That's really low. Yeah.
I had a different experience just the day before we left to come here. I have an adoptee in our group who's been searching since she was 18. She's almost 22. She petitioned the court, received a court order, and an intermediary was appointed. The birth mother was contacted, and the initial response was, as far as I'm concerned, she doesn't exist, she never existed, and she never will exist, and don't bother me again. So the agency went back and told the adoptee this. She got real angry and wrote an angry letter to the birth mother, which was forwarded by the agency. Then, after she had some time to think about her feelings, she wrote another letter which wasn't so angry. Well, I get a call. I have the adoptee calling saying, why won't my birth mother meet me? I get a call from the birth mother. She won't identify herself to me. She says hi and tells me her story, and I said, I know who you are. You're Ann's birth mother. Do you want to tell me your name? No, I'm not going to identify myself, but this woman calls me and wants me to tell her what to do, and I can talk to him blue in the face, and she's still not budging. What do I do?
That's really hard. We always say give them time.
Well, that's what I'm
Yeah,
telling you.
because a lot of times they need that time to get their own lives in order. You know, usually it's people who are in the closet.
Well, she
that
is.
do
She
that.
has 6 other children, had 6 other children. One was killed in an accident. This was the youngest of the 7 children that was surrendered, and only daughter. She had 6 boys, and
Wow.
the daughter she surrendered.
Yeah.
And,
I would say, since she called you and you have a relationship, if you have a way to keep in contact, keep the communication open with
well,
her.
I can write to her
Yeah.
through the agency also, or
And-
I can get a message to have her call me. But this is like...
You know,
I'm in the
educate her.
middle.
You
That's what I'm
can't
doing. I
push
sent her
her
a lot of
to
literature.
consent to contact, because sometimes, you know, if they're in denial, pushing will make them even more in denial. But you can educate her by sharing, you know, what other birth parents' experiences have been, you know, recommend a book for her to read, or
I've done that, and I've mailed
all
her
those kinds
literature.
of, try to get her
A lot of Cub stuff.
open to, sometimes,
Is
you
there
know,
a CUP chapter that, I mean, could maybe she be suggested? that she
There is
might
no
wanna-
Cub chapter in Pittsburgh.
But there's a group though that has birth mothers in it.
That's me.
Ah.
that's you. Yeah, that's a hard one. But really,
She can't come, she won't come to a meeting for fear that,
Her daughter will be there.
that he
yeah,
will be there.
yeah,
She's not going to set herself up to be
Yeah.
trapped in any way, shape, or form until she's ready.
sure. I have a birth mother right now who's been in therapy with me for 2 years, and this is the one I said is terrified of being found. But I've watched her. She came from an extremely dysfunctional alcoholic home, and she's been working through incredible trauma related to the birth father, a lot of physical and sexual abuse by him, and physical and sexual abuse in her family of origin. And she had to work through all those issues, but now I've seen her over a 2-year period where just this last week in a therapy group, she made the statement that she actually loved her child and realized that there was no way she could have done anything but react in a violent, get out of my face way had she been contacted 2 years ago. But now she says, I wouldn't slam the door if she knocked on her door. So some of these things really take time, you know.
Well, she's accepting the reality. She said, I saw another program, and I guess there's more and more of this happening. And I said, yeah, you're right. And I said, it's only a matter of time, because sooner or later she will find you. And it would just be easier if you would consent to it.
Yeah.
But I don't want to scare her, but I know this adoptee she's going to move heaven and earth if she has to find that woman, and she's going to do it.
Yeah.
I have no doubt in my mind that she's going to accomplish her goal. I don't know how or when, but it will happen. So the birth mother better look out, because Ann's going to find that doorstep one of these days.
If we were a whole room full of clinicians, maybe I would spend more time on these others, but we're running a little short on time, so I'm going to just really quickly go over these. Searching for a child born of rape or incest, searching for a child whose father is unknown, finding a dead child at the end of search. These are all situations that I have personally dealt with people in therapy. Sibling searches that exclude the parents, the birth parents. I've had a birth mother in therapy with me who had relinquished a child actually 40 years ago, and this daughter found her siblings, 3 other children the lady had, the birth mother and had been in a relationship with them for 3 years, and then she found out about it. But this adoptee, 40 years old, is so angry at her birth mother that she will have nothing to do with the birth mother. But she's in a relationship with her 3 siblings. So it's very interesting.
Does the birth mother feel sort of betrayed by her other children who kept this relationship going?
Right. That's exactly why she's in therapy, because it just caused all kinds of relationship conflicts amongst the mother and her other 3 children as a result of that. The 3 children are angry because she never told them that they had a sister. You know, they were found and contacted without the birth mother's knowledge. So, yeah, it can get real complicated. Okay, I gave you 2 other handouts. Take these back to your therapist. They are self-assessment for the therapist or the social worker, whoever is working in a professional way with Triad members, to really get your own values and your own attitudes about adoption, really explore those and get those into place so that you can comfortably work with Triad members. And these 2 handouts will really help you in knowing how to do that. The one is a self-assessment guide, and the other one is how to establish therapeutic relationships. Another thing is that you need to make a commitment to long-term therapy. This is not we'll be in therapy for 6 sessions and everything will be magically wonderful. This, as a clinician, you need, if you know you're moving on to something else in 2 months, don't take on a new birth parent in search, you know, because they're going to need more than 2 months.
So what's a typical length of time? Is there any established, or is it?
I don't know about typical. I would say probably the duration of the search and you know, for a period of time after contact, certainly. Some searches go very quickly, and sometimes that's a problem in itself. I've had people who've been in therapy because their search happened in 5 minutes or 3 days, and they weren't emotionally ready to handle, you know, the decisions of contact and reunion. But I would say probably a minimum of 6 months to really work through. I mean, all these things that we've been talking about here, that takes time to really go into all of that and resolve your conflicts about that. The deeper the trauma, the longer the course of therapy. The client needs continual validation, encouragement, and a safe place in which to explore the issues. Some of my clients will only discuss it, and I bet you see this in support groups too. They will only talk about their adoption experience and their search process and their feelings in the group. When they leave that group and go out into the world, they don't talk about it. Yeah. So, and that doesn't even necessarily have to do with being in the closet. It has more with people not being part of the triad, don't understand these issues. They do not understand the obsession. Well, that happened so long ago. Why don't you just forget about it? Your child doesn't want to know you. Well, fill your life with lots of other things. Forget about it, you know. Well, we know how ludicrous that attitude is. But that's why some people will only deal with it in a safe environment, like in a support group or in therapy, where they know they won't be ridiculed or put down for having their feelings. Okay, that leads to another thing. It's really important as a clinician or someone working with triad members, and particularly birth families in search, to clarify, help them clarify and validate their feelings and encourage full expression of those feelings. The negative feelings, we often are taught just the opposite. Oh, well, you know, go do something else. Don't feel this. Don't think about it. Friends will do this. You know, people are not comfortable if you start crying or you get all emotional and you can't talk. And so they'll try to move you away from it. But what I'm saying is feeling brings the healing. And especially if you can do it in a therapeutic environment or in a support group, which is very therapeutic, you know, where there are other people who are feeling the same things you're feeling. This is a crucial thing, to normalize your reactions to these experiences. I wrote here, show how absurd and abnormal it is to expect them not to react or to feel. You know, it's totally ridiculous to tell a birth parent who's had a birth mother who's just given birth to a baby to go away and forget this ever happened to you. It's not the way it works.
I remember leaving the Florence Crittenden home, and we had fake names, and my mother said, well, that happened to Whitney Drake and not Janice Duncan. And I remember
Right.
thinking, there's something wrong about this, but at 18 you're scared, you want to, get
Right.
back in your parents' good graces. Is it a general theme in your practice with birth mothers to talk about, even though they might have a good relationship with their mothers, the anger, the unresolved anger?
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
I mean, I have a great mom, but I'm furious with her now that all this search stuff is coming.
I often will try to get them to engage their, if the ideal is to bring your mother into therapy with you and do that.
When I told her
it's-
I was searching, she said, oh, Janice, why bring this up after all these years? I said, it never went away.
Right.
She said, well, you never mentioned it. And I said, well, who would have talked to me about it?
So one
This
of
was
the
a secret in the family.
One of the things you can do with people like that, with mothers and other family members, is give them books to read, like Birth Bond, where it's not talking about your child, your mother's grandchild, but it's talking about all those other people, and it's a way to begin to educate her.
I'm sure that y'all have seen the little stickers that say something about searching for your identity might upset somebody or something like that. So I showed that to my mother because she's tracing our family tree, and she took it the wrong way. She said, "See, it'll upset somebody." I was like,
Oh, she didn't get it.
No, she thought that was written just for her.
Yeah.
That, like, don't look because it might upset somebody.
Yeah.
Birth mothers never forget for her.
My mother's queen of denial.
But it's important for her to search her roots.
Oh, and she is doing she puts her time, effort, money into this. This is one of the main focuses in her life.
Okay, back to the outline. There are 6 major areas of clinical work with birth parents in search that I listed here. Major categories: loss and grief, shame and guilt, anger and rage. You brought up anger and rage. Self-esteem building and assertiveness training, making that relinquished child real, and finally, and most important of all, mastery and control. Finally getting control of your life. Mastery and control. Sharon Kaplan has a video out called 7 Core Issues that is excellent on just general triad awareness, how the lifelong impact of adoption on the triad. But that's one of her 7 core issues, is the mastery and control. Okay, let's briefly run through these most prominent experiences of birth parents. One is the loss of the child and the profound grief reaction that results in underlined normal reactions and feelings of crying, sadness, depression, feeling of empty void, despair, suicidal feelings, and anxiety and phobias. It's really interesting how many birth parents I have in search are phobic. They become agoraphobic. They're afraid of wide open spaces. They won't drive across the bridge. And it emerges when they're doing a search and beginning to deal with all these things they never dealt with all those years. Guilt, anger, rage, regrets. I gave into the pressure to relinquish. I wasn't strong enough to keep my child. Or the fear that that decision really wasn't in the best interest of your child or yourself. See, that's another one of the realities, that when you're in the search process, ideally, we relinquished our children to parents who would love them totally, unconditionally, and give them everything they wanted or needed. And that's rarely the case that you find. I don't know of any case where you've found that just ideal situation. There's going to be something in that family or the way your child's grown up that you're going to feel you could have done better, Another area that birth parents in search deal with is the life disruption, then and now. Back then, you were moved to a different area, your loss of employment, career, school opportunities, loss of family and friends, loss of self-respect, loneliness, isolation, loss of sense of belonging, the burden of the secret, carrying the secret and the coming out process, obsessive preoccupation with the child and the search now. and an inability to concentrate on anything else. Another area is disturbed area in general, then and now. A lot of times, if you look back in your life, I've seen this a lot in working with birth parents, and even now I see this happen with birth parents relinquishing today. A lot of them are addicts and alcoholics, and that's one of the ways they've generally come out of real dysfunctional families, and one of the ways they coped was to numb out with alcohol or drugs. So you're not only dealing with all the birth parent issues, but you're having to deal with chemical dependence and getting them into other kinds of treatment. Social withdrawal, compulsive overactivity, and emotional numbness. We can get involved in all kinds of very productive things, and workaholics, doing all kinds of things that no one can criticize us for, but we're really numbing ourselves out. We're so busy we don't have time to think or feel. Poor health and lifestyle habits. Okay, the other area is disturbing thoughts and fantasies. Lots of fantasies that your child isn't okay, was killed in a war or an automobile crash, or abused by adoptive parents. My child's on the streets, homeless. You can put your own in there. We've all had them. The rest of this, since we're running out of time and there may be other things coming into this room, you can just read over them. They're pretty self-explanatory. I think most of them we've covered. One of the things I want to say about these fantasies, look at number 7. To combat the limbo of not knowing with all of its disturbing thoughts and fantasies, encourage birth parents to diligently gather factual information in the search process. That really helps. Get those hospital records. Get the original birth certificate. In Washington, starting July 1st, a new law is going into effect where all birth parents, birth mothers, birth fathers, will be able to petition the court and get an original birth certificate. In fact, I don't even think they're going to have to petition the court. They can just send for it. And they will get an original birth certificate. That makes the child real.
I got that from Minnesota.
Yeah.
They have that.
Yeah, I know they have that in
And
Minnesota.
when I got it, I just looked at it for a long time, and it made it really real. Because I denied it, but I was even pregnant.
Right.
Are you talking about the birth certificate before it got changed?
Right. The original birth certificate that has your name on it, that you're the person who gave birth to that child. It's different in every state, but
Here in the state, you cannot get it. Yeah.
the Bureau of Vital Statistics of whatever it's called in your local state.
I sent to the hospital for my hospital records, and when I received it, there was a copy of what they filled out, the registration of birth, with my thumbprints and her footprints.
Oh.
And even though that didn't lead me any closer to finding her, it was something I could touch and,
Yes.
it was only a copy, but I finally saw her footprint.
Yeah, it made her
And
real.
it was really healing.
All right.
Well, if you wrote to the hospital, but you had a fake name at the home, would you give them both names, or would they be reluctant then to
They
send
had
you?
your real name at the Flo Critton home. You just used a fake name.
But at the hospital,
At the hospital, I
They would have
would
used
imagine
her
it was your
real
real name, but I don't know. It may be different in different hospitals, different settings.
Send for them under both.
Yeah.
Do they have to give them to you? I mean, or will they give them to you, the hospital?
Most of the time, birth parents are real successful in getting their hospital records. Yeah. Once in a while, you run into a kink, but generally, it's, try it. More often than not, they have been able to get them. Okay, well, I'm glad we were as small a group as we were, because that gave us time to have more dialogue.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.